Between a person and a wild bear, there is almost always a margin. A few seconds, a few yards, one decision made before the animal ever arrives. These 6 cases are about what happens when that margin holds, and what happens when it was never there at all. What follows are 6 documented bear attacks, each reconstructed from official reports, investigations, and accounts of those who lived through them. We will look at what the animal did and why, what the physical evidence showed, and what investigators concluded afterward. The goal is not to shock you. It is to understand exactly how each of these encounters worked, step by step. Because the difference between the people who walked out and the people who did not was rarely strength, and it was rarely luck. It was usually information, arriving a moment too early or a moment too late. Cynthia Dusel-Bacon feels the bear's teeth close on her forearm. She is on her back in the brush where it put her, and the 2-way radio is still clipped to the pack a few feet away. The bear does not let go, and some part of her, calm in a way she will never fully be able to explain, already understands that lying still is not working. She is 31 years old. It is August 13th, 1977, in the Yukon-Tanana uplands of interior Alaska, rough country of black spruce and alder northeast of the small settlement of Tanacross. She is a field geologist for the United States Geological Survey, and she is doing what field geologists did in that era, mapping bedrock alone. Dropped by helicopter at first light, working a hillside on foot, waiting for the aircraft to come back in the afternoon. She carries a rock hammer, a hand lens, a notebook, and a radio. She does not carry a gun. Almost no one on those crews did. The black bear had come out of the brush earlier and simply looked at her. Not a sow with cubs. No carcass it was guarding. No food on the ground between them. She waved her arms and shouted, "The way you are told to," and the bear moved off a short distance and began to circle. That circling is the detail that matters. A frightened bear leaves. This one was deciding. When it came back, it came to make contact. It knocked her down and bit into her, and she did the thing the era's advice told her to do. She went limp. She protected her face and held still, waiting for the animal to lose interest and leave. But a black bear that follows a person in open daylight, with no cubs and no food to defend, is not defending anything. It is testing whether she is prey. Stillness answered the question for it. The bear settled in and began to feed. That was the moment the rules she had been taught turned into the wrong rules. She could feel the animal working at her arms, the pressure, the grating, the deliberate patience of it. And she made the only decision left that could keep her alive. She stopped playing dead and started solving the problem in front of her. The radio was a few feet away. She worked toward it, got a hand to it, and keyed the microphone. Then she did something almost no one could do. In plain, level words, she told her colleagues that a bear was chewing on her arm and that they needed to come now. She answered their questions. She told them where her hillside was. She kept talking while the animal kept working at her, because the radio was the only tool she had left and panic would have wasted it. Her voice on that channel is the reason there is a story to tell instead of a body to recover. Her crewmates were mapping other slopes within helicopter range. They heard her. The pilot lifted. They found the hillside, and they set the aircraft down close enough that a colleague could reach her and finally drive the bear off her. Accounts credit a pistol at the scene with ending it. By then, the animal had spent a long time on both of her arms. Medical findings and aftermath. The pattern of her wounds tells you exactly what kind of attack this was. The damage was concentrated on both arms, the limbs she had raised to shield herself. And it was not one defensive bite. It was sustained feeding, repeated bites, crushing, the methodical work of an animal treating a downed body as a meal. Both arms were destroyed beyond any hope of saving them. Surgeons amputated her left arm high, at the shoulder, and her right arm below the elbow. She lost a large volume of blood on that hillside and the built-in delay of a remote interior site. The flight in, the flight back out to a hospital, is the kind of gap that kills people. She lived because help was already within radio range and in the air within minutes, not hours. What she did afterward is the part worth sitting with. Cynthia Dusel-Bacon went back to the United States Geological Survey. She returned to science with prosthetic arms, kept publishing, and built a full professional life. The bear took her arms. It did not take the mind or the career that had made her good at the work. Incident analysis. What happened on that hillside was not a mistake in the ordinary sense, because she followed the guidance of her time exactly. And that is the lesson buried inside it. The instruction to lie still and play dead was built for Grizzly encounters, for a defensive charge by a mother or a surprised bear that wants distance, not a meal. Against a predatory black bear, that same response is close to the worst thing a person can do, because passivity is precisely the signal a predator is waiting for. The study of bear behavior absorbed cases like hers and changed the standard advice as a result. Fight a predatory black bear. Do not submit to it. Hit the face and the nose, make noise, and make yourself a cost the animal decides it does not want to pay. The second thing that decided this outcome was the radio, and the discipline with which she used it. She was alone in country with no roads and no fast way out. And the single reason she survived is that she kept hold of the one tool that could summon help and used it with a clarity most people cannot manage in a quiet room, let alone under an animal. Her cruise speed did the rest. Take either piece away, the radio on her body, or the composure to work it. And this is a recovery, not a rescue. Practical takeaway. Learn the difference between the two kinds of attack because the correct responses are opposites. A surprised defensive bear wants you to stop being a threat, and playing dead can work. A black bear that follows you, circles, and closes in with no cubs and no food to defend is treating you as prey, and the answer is to fight with everything you have. And in remote country, the thing that saves you is often the tool that calls for help. Keep it on your body, not in your pack. On another Alaskan coast, a man who spent 13 summers living closer to wild bears than almost anyone thought possible would finally run out of the luck that had kept him alive. Timothy Treadwell, 46, decided to stay on the Katmai coast into October, weeks past the season when the bears that knew him had gone to den. It killed him, and it killed Amie Huguenard, the 37-year-old woman who had flown out to be with him. A video camera was running when it happened, its lens cap still on, and for about 6 minutes it recorded everything. He was 46 years old, and he had earned a strange kind of expertise. For 13 summers he had camped among the brown bears of the Katmai coast in southwest Alaska, filming them, naming them, moving among them at distances that made professional biologists go pale. He believed he understood these animals as individuals, and in a narrow sense, he did. He could tell them apart. He knew their moods and their routines. What he had let himself forget is that his knowledge of them was never a contract they had signed. His camp that fall sat in a place he called the Grizzly Maze, a tangle of alder and bear trails near Kaflia Bay. A travel corridor, which is to say a place bears move through by design. With him was Amie Huguenard, 37, his girlfriend, who was far more cautious around the animals than he was, and who had come out to join him for the end of the season. To picture the setting is to understand the exposure. The Katmai coast is low, wet ground, alder thick enough that you can hear a bear you cannot see, tidal flats and salmon streams that pull animals through in a steady traffic. Treadwell had spent seasons learning to move inside that traffic. He set his tent low, kept his gear close, and treated the daily passage of large predators past his camp as ordinary, because for him it had become ordinary. 13 summers of it had rewired what the word safe meant to him. A biologist looking at the same camp would have counted the number of bears that walked through it each day and called it something else entirely. The timing is the first link in the chain. By early October, the coastal bears Treadwell knew, the ones habituated to his presence over years, were shutting down for winter. The bears still moving were different animals, hungry, unfamiliar, feeding hard in the last push before denning, when a bear will investigate any possible calorie. Treadwell had always operated on the belief that the individual bears around him were safe because he knew them. In October, the bear that came to his camp was one he did not know at all. A large, older male with no history with him and every biological reason to treat a camp as an opportunity. That recording is why this death is documented in a way almost no wild animal death ever is. With the lens cap on, the camera captured 6 minutes of sound and nothing else. Treadwell's voice, and Amie's, and the animal. The recording is not something to describe in detail out of respect for the two people on it. What matters for understanding the incident is what it proves. It proves Amie did not run and did not abandon him. She stayed, and she fought the bear, striking at it to try to drive it off. And it proves how fast a situation like this moves from an ordinary evening in camp to something no one could stop. The next day, the bush pilot Willie Fulton flew in to pick them up on schedule. From the air, the camp was wrong. Gear scattered, no one waving him down, and a large bear moving on the ground where two people should have been. He could not safely land into that, and what he could see from above was already enough to tell him the pickup had become a recovery. Rangers and troopers who responded were confronted by an aggressive, older male brown bear holding the site and killed it. A second, smaller bear as well. The examination that followed confirmed both deaths. 13 summers of proximity had ended in a single October night. In the last stretch of the season, Treadwell had always treated as just one more week on the coast. Medical findings and aftermath. The recovery and examination established that both Treadwell and Huguenard were killed and, consistent with late-season feeding behavior, partially consumed. The reason rangers found a bear still holding the site the following day. This is the signature of a fall predatory feeding event, rather than a brief defensive strike. An animal in hyperphagia, the pre-denning drive to eat, does not deliver a warning bite and leave. It commits. The autopsy work also confirmed the sequence the audio implied, that this was not instantaneous, and that Amie Huguenard was alive and resisting during the attack rather than a passive victim. There was no firearm in play that could change the outcome. Treadwell, as a matter of principle, did not carry one, and he generally traveled without bear spray as well. Incident analysis. It is easy to reduce this to recklessness, and easy is usually wrong. What actually happened was a long, slow erosion of caution that felt from the inside, like growing competence. Every summer that ended without an injury taught Treadwell that his methods worked, when what it really taught him was that he had not yet met the wrong bear on the wrong day. Habituation runs one direction only. He learned the bears. The bears never agreed to anything. 3 specific decisions did the damage. He camped in a travel corridor, which put a steady stream of unpredictable animals through his living space. He stayed into October, when the familiar, tolerant bears were gone and hungry strangers were moving through. And he carried nothing, no firearm, no spray. That could interrupt an attack once it began, because deterrence did not fit the relationship he believed he had with these animals. Any one of those choices alone might have been survivable. Stacked together, in that place, at that time of year, they removed every layer of margin at once. The bear that killed him was not unusual. The exposure was? Practical takeaway. Familiarity with wild animals is not a safety system, and it is most dangerous exactly when it feels most earned. Respect the calendar and the map as much as the animal. Know when the tolerant bears leave and the hungry ones arrive. Do not sleep in a corridor bears use, and carry a deterrent even when, especially when, you are sure you will never need it. The relationship you think you have with a wild animal exists entirely on your side. Far to the south, in the open sage of Yellowstone, one bear would raise a question that took 2 deaths and a summer of investigation to answer. John Wallace, 59, was found with injuries that told investigators he had been killed and then fed on. His pack was still with him. Days had passed before searchers reached the site. He was the second man that summer to die in the same high valley, to what the evidence would conclude was the same bear. The place was Hayden Valley, in the heart of Yellowstone National Park, and the year was 2011, a summer that forced one of the hardest questions wildlife managers ever have to answer. To understand the second death, you have to start with the first, because they were not the same kind of event at all. On the morning of July 6, 2011, Brian Matayoshi, 57, and his wife Marilyn were hiking the Wapiti Lake Trail, open country of meadow and scattered timber where the sight lines feel safe precisely because you can see so far. They came over a rise and saw a grizzly at a distance, and then saw that it was a sow with 2 cubs. They began to back away, which was right. But the ground did not give them the room the open country seemed to promise, and when the sow started toward them, the distance closed faster than a person can process. That is the moment the encounter turned. Startled, the Matayoshis ran. Running is the one thing that makes a surprised grizzly worse. A grizzly can outrun a racehorse over a short sprint. Against a human being, it is no contest. Flight triggers the pursuit reflex, and the sow ran Brian down from behind, caught him, and delivered the short, targeted bites of a defensive animal, removing what it read as a threat to its cubs. Marilyn, further back, went to the ground and stayed still, and the sow, its point made, left her and gathered its cubs. Marilyn survived. Brian did not. Everything about the attack, from the surprise to the presence of cubs to the break-off once the threat was down, was defensive behavior. Investigators reviewed that attack and reached a conclusion that surprised some of the public. They did not remove the sow. Everything about the July event was textbook defensive behavior. A mother grizzly protecting cubs from a perceived threat is doing exactly what the species is built to do, and a park cannot euthanize an animal for being a grizzly. She was identified, documented, and left on the landscape with her cubs. That decision was defensible on every fact then available. It also could not account for what had not happened yet. Late in August, John Wallace, 59, of Michigan, an experienced backcountry traveler visiting a park he loved, set out alone on the Mary Mountain Trail in the same Hayden Valley country. Hiking solo removes the single best protection a person has in grizzly country, which is not strength or speed, but numbers and noise. A lone, quiet hiker is the easiest person in the park to surprise. When Wallace did not come out on schedule, a search began, and it was days before he was found. The delay matters because it changed what the scene could tell investigators and what the bear had been able to do in the meantime. What searchers found told a completely different story from the July attack. Wallace had not simply been killed and left. He had been fed on, and the site showed the behavior of an animal treating a human body as food, cached, returned to, defended. This was not a brief defensive strike by a startled mother protecting cubs. This was a bear doing what a predator does with a carcass. The investigation collected DNA from the Wallace site, hair and other biological evidence the bear had left behind. Run against the samples on file, the genetic profile pointed back to the same sow from the July attack. One animal, 2 dead men, 7 weeks apart. And between the 2 events, a shift no one had watched happen and no one could precisely date. From a mother defending cubs in July to a bear that had, at minimum, fed on human remains by the end of August. Medical findings and aftermath. The contrast between the 2 victims is the clinical heart of this case. Brian Matayoshi's injuries were the signature of a defensive mauling. Deep bites to the lower body and legs, the kind of wounds a grizzly inflicts to neutralize a threat before breaking off. The attack was severe enough to be fatal, but it was brief and targeted. The bear did not linger or consume. John Wallace's remains, found after several days, showed the opposite pattern. Injuries and site evidence consistent with a bear that killed and then fed. For managers, that difference was everything. A bear that has consumed a human being represents a category of future risk that a defensive sow does not. because the behavior can repeat and can generalize. In October 2011, the sow was captured and euthanized, and her 2 cubs were placed in a zoo rather than released. Incident analysis. This case is studied because it sits on the exact line where wildlife management is hardest. After July, every fact said the same thing. Defensive attack, protected behavior, no basis to kill the bear. After August, the same animal had crossed into behavior that no park can leave on a trail system used by millions of people. Both decisions were correct on the information available at the time, and together they produced an outcome no one wanted. That is the uncomfortable truth here. You often cannot tell from a first defensive event what an animal will do next, and waiting for certainty can mean waiting for a second body. There is also a hard lesson about the July attack itself. The Matayoshis were not careless people, but running from a surprised grizzly is the single most reliable way to convert a defensive bluff into a pursuit and a catch. A grizzly can outrun a racehorse over short distance. The instinct to flee is exactly the instinct that gets people killed, and overriding it is a skill that has to be decided on long before the bear is ever in front of you. Practical takeaway. In grizzly country, surprise is the real danger, so make noise on blind trails, keep your group together, and carry bear spray where your hand can reach it. If a grizzly charges, do not run. Running turns you into prey. And understand that when authorities remove a bear after a death, it is a judgment about future risk to the next person on the trail, not a punishment of the animal. A few hundred miles north, in the forests outside Glacier, a man riding fast down a wooded trail would meet a grizzly with no time at all to make any decision. Brad Treat comes around the blind bend at speed and hits the grizzly before any part of his mind can name what is in the trail. His riding partner, a short distance back, sees the bike stop as if it struck a wall. Treat is already off the bike and on the ground, and the bear is already on him. The whole thing compressed into less time than it takes to read this sentence. It is June 29th, 2016, in the Flathead National Forest just outside West Glacier, Montana. On a network of wooded trails, locals ride hard. Brad Treat is 38 years old and a law enforcement officer for the U.S. Forest Service. A man who works in this country, knows it is grizzly country, and is exactly the kind of experienced, careful outdoorsman you would least expect to find at the center of a fatal mauling. He is riding with a friend on a warm afternoon. They are moving fast, which on these trails is the whole point. Speed is the entire story. On a mountain bike, a rider on flowing single track can move at 20 miles an hour or better, silent except for tire hum, closing on blind corners faster than any animal can clear them. Every piece of standard bear advice, make noise, give the animal space and time, never surprise it, assumes a human moving at a walk. A cyclist at speed violates all of it at once, not through carelessness, but through the physics of the activity. Treat was doing nothing wrong by the ordinary standard. He was simply moving faster than the safety rules were ever written for. Picture the ground itself. These are forested trails, hemmed close by brush and young timber. The sight lines short and the corners tight. The kind of riding where the trail reveals itself only a few yards ahead, and the reward is exactly that rhythm of reacting to what appears. It is beautiful, flowing country to ride. It is also country where a large animal can stand 10 feet away, around a wall of green, completely invisible until you are on top of it. On foot, at a walking pace, you would hear each other and both move off. On a bike at speed, the corner hands you the bear with no margin at all. The grizzly was on or beside the trail, around a feature that hid it until the last instant. There was no sight line, no warning, no chance to yell or brake or turn. Treat struck the bear at close to full speed. The collision itself, a heavy impact out of nowhere, is what set everything after it in motion. A grizzly hit hard and by surprise does not pause to assess intent. It responds to a sudden violent contact the way the species is built to respond, immediately and at close range, and Treat was on the ground and within reach before he could have understood what he had run into. There was no interval between the impact and the attack. They were effectively the same event. His companion was left in an impossible position, a second man, unarmed, facing a grizzly already committed to his friend at a distance measured in feet. There is a hard truth in that scene. There was nothing he could physically do against a bear of that size with his hands, and staying would only have made 2 victims instead of 1. He got himself clear and rode for help as fast as the trail allowed, which was the correct and the only survivable choice. By the time responders reached the site, Brad Treat was dead. He had been killed in the first seconds, in an encounter that offered no interval in which any decision, his or his partner's, could have changed the result. Medical findings and aftermath. The injuries were consistent with a rapid close-range mauling by a large bear reacting to a high-impact collision. Concentrated trauma to the upper body, head, and neck. The areas a grizzly targets when it commits at once rather than delivering warning bites. This was not a prolonged attack. The evidence pointed to a fatal outcome within moments, which is its own grim mercy compared to the drawn-out survival ordeals in other cases. There was no window for field aid to matter. The lethal damage was done in the first exchange before his riding partner could even reach him. The board of review that examined the case reached a conclusion that shaped how it was handled afterward. This was a sudden encounter collision, a surprise reaction by the bear, not a predatory or food-driven attack. On that basis, the grizzly was not pursued for removal, and it was never positively identified. The finding matters, because it locates the cause not in a dangerous individual animal, but in the mechanics of the encounter itself. Incident analysis. What makes this case important is that there is no human failure to point to in the usual sense. Brad Treat was competent, experienced, and local. He was not food conditioning bears, not hiking alone at dusk, not ignoring warnings. The chain that killed him was built almost entirely out of speed and terrain. A blind corner, a bear in the wrong 10 feet of trail, and a closing rate that erased every second in which noise or spacing could have done its job. When you take away the time, you take away every tool bear safety depends on. That is the real lesson, and it is a hard one for a growing sport. Mountain biking in grizzly country quietly defeats the core of bear avoidance, which is giving the animal enough advance awareness to move off. The faster and quieter you travel, the more you convert every blind feature into a potential collision. The answer is not to stop riding. It is to ride these places as if the trail could hand you a bear at any corner. Slowing for blind features, riding in groups, making noise on descents, and treating speed itself as the hazard it is here. Practical. Takeaway. Speed and silence are what get cyclists killed in bear country, because together they erase the warning time every other safety rule relies on. On blind, brushy trails where a grizzly could be present, slow down for corners you cannot see through, ride with others, and make noise going downhill. The one time you least want to, and the one time it matters most. You cannot outbreak a bear that is already in front of you. You can only avoid arriving there at 20 miles an hour. On a treeless island in the Canadian Arctic, a father with no time and no weapon would make the only decision left to him, and it would cost him everything. The light over Sentry Island in early July never fully leaves. This far up the western shore of Hudson Bay, the summer sun rides low and long, and the island sits flat and treeless in cold gray water, a low back of rock and tundra a few miles off the community of Arviat. The wind comes off the bay with an edge that numbs bare hands even in July, and it carries the smell of salt and wet stone. There are usually birds working the shoreline. On this day, along one stretch of shore, they were not there. Aaron Gibbons, 31, had brought his children out to the island. This is what families around Arviat do. Go out on the land and the water, to fish, to be together in a place their people have used for generations. being on the land is not recreation there in the way it is farther south. It is part of the fabric of life, passed from one generation to the next, and taking your kids out to a place like Sentry Island is as ordinary as a drive to a park would be elsewhere. It was that kind of day. Gibbons was a father doing something entirely normal with his children, on ground his family knew well, with no reason to expect the day to be different from any other. The danger on that shore was seasonal and specific. The polar bears of western Hudson Bay spend the ice-free months on shore, waiting out the summer until the bay freezes again and they can return to hunting seals from the ice. As that ice-free period has grown longer, more bears spend more time on land, hungrier and closer to people, in exactly the window when families are out on the coast. A polar bear on land in July is not a bear that has wandered off course. It is a large predator between meals. In the season, it is most likely to treat anything moving as food. Unlike a grizzly, a polar bear rarely bluffs. It has no history of sharing its world with people who might not be prey, and it does not give the warning displays a brown bear gives. There is another difference that matters. A grizzly or a black bear has spent its evolutionary life sharing landscapes with other large animals and, more recently, with people. It has a whole vocabulary of bluff charges, huffing and posturing meant to settle a conflict without a fight. A polar bear evolved on the sea ice as an apex hunter of seals, with almost nothing to bluff against. When it moves toward you, it is usually not a warning. It is the hunt. That is why encounters with polar bears turn lethal so much faster than encounters with the bears farther south, and why a person on that shore has far less margin to read the situation and react. One of these bears came for Gibbons and his children. What he did in the next moments is the entire reason his children are alive. He put himself between the bear and his kids. He got them moving toward safety and kept himself in the animal's path, making his own body the obstacle the bear had to deal with before it could reach them. Think about what that requires. Not a plan, not training, but an instant, total decision to trade your own chances for theirs, made in front of an animal you already know you cannot beat. One of his children reached a radio and called out for help across the water to Arviat. A child, doing the one thing that could bring anyone, keying a radio to say her father was being attacked, while that father held the only line that mattered. The call carried. Family and community members heard it and raced out from Arviat to the island by boat, covering the water as fast as engines allow, knowing exactly what they were riding toward. They reached the bear and shot it. They were in time to save the children Aaron Gibbons had shielded with his body. They were not in time to save him. Medical findings and aftermath. A polar bear is the largest land predator on Earth, and the physical mismatch between that animal and an unarmed man is total. The injuries in an attack like this come from an animal built to kill large marine mammals. Enormous bite force, forepaw strikes with a bear's full weight behind them, and a predatory pattern that goes for a kill rather than a warning. Against that, a person has no physical defense to offer. Gibbons was killed at the scene despite the fast response from the community, because there was no interval in which the outcome for him could be changed once the bear had closed. The aftermath fell on Arviat as a whole. Gibbons was later recognized for what the facts plainly show. He died buying his children the seconds they needed to live, and the community carried both the loss and the meaning of it. Incident analysis. There is no error to autopsy here, and it would be an insult to look for one. Aaron Gibbons did not provoke an animal, ignore a warning, or make a careless choice. He took his children out on the land, the way people on that coast always have, and met a predator that has become steadily more present as the ice season shrinks. The only decision he was given was the one no parent should have to make, and he made it without hesitation, in the direction that saved his kids. If there is a systemic lesson, it sits above the individual. The lengthening ice-free season is pushing more polar bears onto more shoreline, hungrier and for longer, precisely where and when families are out on the coast. That is not a story about one man's judgment. It is a slow change in the risk of ordinary summer life on that coast, and communities like Arviat are the ones absorbing it first, with bear monitors, firearms close at hand, and a hard-earned awareness that the shore is not the safe ground it once was in July. Practical takeaway. Treat a polar bear on land in summer as a hunting predator, not a nuisance, because that is what a fasting bear in the ice-free season most often is. In polar bear country, no one goes out on the land without a firearm and someone assigned to watch, and children are never the ones left nearest the water. The one thing Aaron Gibbons had, the will to put himself between the bear and his kids, is the thing no equipment can replace, and the thing that saved them. Back down the length of the continent, on a logging road on the British Columbia coast, a man with nothing but a folding knife would prove how thin the line between the two outcomes can be. Colin Dowler rode alone up a coastal logging road to scout a mountain, carrying a folding knife with a blade barely 3 inches long. That knife is the only reason he rode back down. What it cost him to use it, the deep bites, the torn leg, the miles he then had to ride bleeding, and how close it came to not being enough, is the whole story. It was late July 2019, on the mainland coast of British Columbia near Ramsey Arm. Steep timber country reached by boat and old logging roads, the kind of place where the nearest help is a logging camp miles away, and the nearest hospital is a float plane flight beyond that. Dowler, in his 40s, had gone up to look over a mountain he had a personal connection to, riding a mountain bike up the switchbacks in country he knew. This is not the setup of a careless man in the wrong place. It is an experienced outdoorsman doing exactly what he had done many times, in country where grizzlies live but rarely bother anyone. The bear changed that ordinary calculation almost immediately. A grizzly came out onto the road, and instead of moving off the way the great majority of bears do, it came toward him. Dowler did the reasonable things first. He talked to it, tried to make himself known as a person rather than prey, kept his bike between himself and the animal, and backed his way along the road. None of it worked. The bear stayed with him, closing the gap, unbothered by the noise and the movement that turn most bears around. That failure to deter is the signal that this was not a normal encounter. A bear that will not be talked off, that keeps pressing toward a person who is doing everything right, has already made a decision. There is a specific dread in that slow approach that a sudden charge does not have. A surprise attack is over before fear can fully form. This was the opposite. A bear coming on deliberately, giving Dowler enough time to try everything he knew and enough time to watch each thing fail. He had a mountain of timber above him and an empty road below. No one within miles, and an animal that had picked him and would not be argued out of it. When it reached him, it took him off the bike and put him on the ground. It bit into his leg and worked at his midsection, and the detail he would later use to describe it is the one that stays with people. He could feel the animal's teeth grating against his bones. He was being taken apart by an animal many times his strength, on an empty road with no one else within miles and no help coming. Everything now depended on what he could do himself in the next few seconds, with what was in his pocket. What he had was the knife, a small folding blade, the kind a person carries for cutting rope, not for fighting a grizzly. And in the middle of an attack that should have killed him, Dowler made the second decision that defined the day. He got the knife open, reached to the one place on a bear where a small blade can matter, and drove it into the animal's neck. The bear reacted to that, a sudden, sharp new pain from its intended prey, and it broke off and moved away. The knife did not overpower the grizzly. It changed the animal's math, gave it a reason to reconsider, and bought Dowler the opening he needed. Then came the part that most people underestimate. Torn open and bleeding, Dowler got himself back onto the bike and rode. He covered the miles of logging road down toward a work camp, holding himself together on a machine, fighting the shock and the blood loss that make a person want to sit down and rest, the urge that kills people in his position. He knew that stopping meant bleeding out alone on a road no one was traveling, so he did not stop. He reached the camp, The workers there gave him first aid and got the call out, and he was airlifted to a hospital. He lived. Medical findings and aftermath. The wounds were severe and concentrated where the bear had focused. Deep bites to the leg and damage to the torso. The grating against bone that he described as the sound and feel of teeth reaching the skeleton through muscle. Blood loss was the immediate threat to his life, and the self-rescue ride is the reason it did not kill him. He closed the distance to help while he still had the reserve to do it, rather than waiting on a road no one was traveling. At the hospital, he faced the long arc these injuries always carry: surgery, infection risk from a bear's mouth, and a recovery measured in months. He survived intact enough to tell the story himself, which in this category of attack is the rare outcome. Incident analysis. This case is a study in a bear that would not follow the script and a man who kept making correct decisions anyway. Dowler did the recommended things in order, spoke to the bear, kept an object between them, retreated without running, and none of it worked because the animal's behavior was already outside the normal range. That is worth naming plainly. The standard advice is built for the ordinary bear, and it usually works, but it is not a guarantee against the rare individual that has decided to press an attack. When de-escalation fails, the question becomes whether you have anything left to fight with, and where you put it. The knife is the hinge. A small blade is close to useless against a grizzly everywhere except the few soft, vital areas, and Dowler put his into one of them under the worst possible conditions. It did not win a fight. It created a moment of doubt in the animal, and against a committed bear, that moment is sometimes the entire difference. The self-evacuation sealed it. Fighting back bought his life. Riding out kept it. Practical takeaway. Do the de-escalation first, every time. Talk, stand your ground, keep something between you and the bear, and back away without running. But understand that it can fail, and decide in advance that if a bear commits to an attack, you will fight, and you will aim for the eyes, the nose, and the throat, because that is where a small weapon or a bare hand can still change an animal's mind. Colin Dowler survived a grizzly with a pocket knife and a long ride down a mountain, not because either was a match for the bear, but because he refused to stop making decisions while he still had any left to make. Across all 6 cases, the same pattern held. The people who survived usually had one thing left to use: a radio, a folding knife, a decision made before the bear closed the distance. The people who did not were most often given no interval to use anything at all. The animal is rarely the whole story. The margin is. If you want more survival cases taken apart the same way, the evidence, the biology, and the decisions that decided them, subscribe and stay with us. We will keep understanding these one case at a time. Stay safe out there.
Hey, we need your help. If you've loved these terrifying true stories so far, we need your help to keep sharing them and create new episodes every week. Please grab your phone, scan the QR code now, and tap the subscribe button that opens on your screen.